This video isn't what you think it is. Guess what? We're taking a break from watercolor flowers and painting this and this. Here we go. Now you're seeing black and white inspiration photos and you're probably thinking, wait, what? That's right. We're going over the big shapes in this scene with a Sharpie to familiarize ourselves with the basic layout. This is a great way to understand basic shapes in a landscape. Print out a black and white version so you're not distracted by color. You're not getting all excited about the colors you get to paint. No, you're just looking at the shapes and you're roughing them out with a Sharpie. And there's no stress because you're just doing this on scratch paper. This is just a little bit of a sketch, a little bit of a doodle before you dive in. I'm using my 1/2 inch dagger, but you could use a number 6 round or something very similar. Curved edge down, and I'm just creating a stroke with a slight curve lifting up as I stroke outward. And I'm creating this section here, which is just really an elongated triangle. Now with a little bit of yellow, I'm going right to the center and creating that big triangle, which is essentially my foreground. And then with green, I'm going right underneath another elongated triangle. I basically am thinking about this composition as a bunch of triangles. Ignore everything else in the beginning except your basic shapes. All right, just wrapping up that last little triangle there on the right. I should mention this is a modern landscape, breezy, expressive, not super realistic. That's our goal. We cannot go any further without talking about atmospheric perspective. It's a mouthful, but listen, it's basically the idea that things in the foreground appear more yellow, things in the middle ground appear more green or just neutral, what they're supposed to be, and things in the background, the distance, appear more purple or blue. So when I'm choosing the colors, as I rough in these shapes that I identified with my Sharpie on the black and white photo, I'm always thinking about those 3 basic colors and the distances. So foreground, middle ground, background. So right now I'm putting in those distant mountains and I'm using just a really pretty like bluish purple kind of whatever I picked up from the palette. And already you can kind of see how we are creating a sense of depth in this scene. And notice I just pointed to the fact that I don't feel the need to go all the way to the edge in my paintings. I actually kind of like the way it looks when I don't go all the way to the edge in my landscapes especially. So just food for thought. Those first green mountains that I added in are starting to dry, but they're still damp. But with the tip of my brush and a darker, well, actually a little bit brighter green, I'm adding in a few little suggestions of bushes, trees, a little definition in that kind of horizon line. Adding some texture in the foreground with the side of my dagger brush and just bounce, tap, bounce, and let what happens happen. I'm keeping in mind though to make sure that there's a lot more yellow in my green than vice versa, because why? I want to make sure that things really look foregroundy-ish in that foreground of mine. As I'm painting, I am looking back to the color inspiration photo and of course take some liberties. There's definitely some red sand in the foreground. I'm just making sure that there's still some yellow on my brush. So all these textury marks that I'm adding really stay pushed forward. Everything is still damp now, so I can define things. It's a great time to define because I can change the silhouette of the original strokes I put down because of that dampness. So I'm doing a little bit of that here, adding a little green, extending out those distant mountains. And yeah, I'm not adding more purple at this point, but there's so much purple back there that everything still looks very distant, even though I'm adding a skosh of green. Just remember, as I say, when the page is wet or damp, you have an opportunity. So you can work back and forth, adding the green. Now I do feel like I want some more purple back in there to reestablish that distant kind of vibe. And so I can add it easily and then everything blends beautifully because I have that opportunity of a wet page at this point. If you're having a good time at this point, friends, can I ask you to give this video a boop so the algorithm here on YouTube lets everybody know that we're having a landscape party and that they should join in the fun? I'd appreciate it. Now I'm just going to add a little detail. Left, right, middle. You see those circled parts? That's what I'm after. And everything's still pretty damp. So just going to tap in some accent colors. I mixed a little red with a little bit of green. Yep. Dab it in and then with a clean brush, just let it spread out a little bit with some water. And there you have the accent there. It's pretty simple and straightforward. If you apply too much color, rinse your brush, dry it off a little bit, and lift out some of that extra color that you added. If you want to dry things at any point in this, you don't have to sit around and wait. You can use a hair dryer or one of these little heat guns. They come in such handy. Okay, so friends, listen, if you're enjoying this, but you're wondering what some of these techniques are, wet on damp, wet on dry, lifting, and you want to get back to basics, watch this video. It will certainly enlighten you creatively, watercolor wise. I think you'll enjoy it. Go get it. I'm using the tip of my dagger and some strong red and just adding some little dab and lift, dab and lifts, dab and lifts, and accenting. These are distant trees, bushes, shrubs. I mean, are there shrubs in the desert? But you know what I mean. Just strong texture. Heading into the foreground, I'm using a dark green. Just mix some green with some dark blue or some brown, and you're going to have it. Lots of pigment on your brush. And do the same over on that right-hand side mountain. And the thing is, at this point, friends, these accents, these textury details are all about contrast. So some of those color rules with the foreground, middle, and background that applied don't apply so much when you're adding those final, strong, contrasty details. And please have fun at this point. These are kind of your final moments before we add in that cactus. I am bringing in some really pretty peaches that are mingling in with that dark emerald on the right-hand side mountain, and rinsing my brush, lifting some of the color out and seeing what happens underneath as I lift the color away and everything blends and gets all juicy and gooey and lovely. Have fun like this at this point in the painting. Push the color around, blend some areas, and see what happens. The key to having fun at this point, but not letting your composition run away, is keeping an eye on those basic shapes that you roughed in with the Sharpie on that scratch pad. Think about keeping those shapes strong and visually front and center. Clean that brush, load up with water, and paint that water right into the sky, leaving a little margin between your mountains and the water that you're painting on. I want you to see here how much water I'm using. I'm creating a really shallow puddle on my page. All right, strong line right where the horizon meets the sky, and then just dab and scratch and blend and scrub that water out. Now, oh yeah, now's the fun. Your page is wet. It's ready for that beautiful explosive sky. Dab in some orange and stroke upward very quickly and shortly. Dab, dab, rinse your brush. Come back across over top all those dabs with another yellow, stroking upwards again. Look at that. You can already see that sky happening. Skies don't have to be overthought. Don't overthink it in the skies. Just don't. It's not worth it. A little bit of blue dabbed in. I'm not blending because I don't want green in my sky. A little bit of purple down there right at the horizon line. Oh, this is good. This sky, look back at your inspiration photo. It's a textury sky. I'm not trying to create every last little cloud and get it just so. No, I'm creating expression, some violet up there. I'm just working along that wet edge as I go up. Dab, dab, scratch, scratch, blend, blend. Rinse your brush in between, and now just some clean water across the top to blendy blend, and then dab it out as you go up the left of the sky, creating some motion. Dab, dab, scratch, and lift and carry those strokes up to the left-hand corner of your sky to create some of that beautiful swirly cloud, wind-blowing motion. You got it. Your sky's roughed in, it's pretty wet, so you have an opportunity to go around and add some more texture and detailing into the rest of your landscape, because having that sky in there gives you a sense of where you'd like things to go. And I'm really feeling like I wanted more texture down here, so I grabbed a yellowy green, pretty decent amount of pigment on my brush, and I'm just dabbing and dragging downwards a little bit for just a little bit of a suggestion of shrubbery right in the foreground there. Now I'm rinsing my brush, and we're going to head back into the mountains on the right hand side. I've got a lot of dark green on my brush, and I'm using the curved edge and just dabbing, lifting up and down, and just dragging as I go to create this kind of like column effect. Rinse my brush, going back into that sky right at the top, and with the clean brush loading up that beautiful soft blue and just scratching it in just on top. I don't want to mix the colors on the page too much, so I'm just using a light hand, getting in, scratching in some of that color and getting out. And then blendy blend with the clean brush loaded with water, and you're going to be done with this sky. I'm using a light touch at this point, just blending around. I don't want to over blend because I don't want the sky to be purple up there. I want it to be decidedly blue. So just use a light touch, don't over blend. All right, now at this point, it's time. We got to start thinking about drying things out completely. Okay, last but not least, we're going to add this cactus, and we're going to mix a really dark neutral color, basically all your pinks, greens, blues, and a little bit of brown, and there you have it. She's a beauty. Super saturated. Load up that number 2 brush. Well, I've got the dagger now, but look how dark that is. Here we go. Now, I'm taking my time figuring out the placement on this. Refer back to your photo. Keep your brush loaded with that gorgeous, juicy color. The key is having a lot of that color on there, because if you don't, you're not going to get this high contrast look. And I'm just creating a really light stroke every time my brush touches the paper. And I'm dabbing in pigment, more pigment into the wet areas to, again, really get that dark, dark saturation. But right before your eyes, this Seguro, is that how it's pronounced? Cactus is appearing, and it is just bringing this landscape full circle. I love the contrast. You've got the washy, expressive, juicy watercolor landscape in the background, and then boom, this more detailed, contrasty cactus in the foreground. And it just is beautiful. Chef's kiss. Be proud of yourself for getting this far. But guess what? We're going to paint another landscape. So hang tight, stick with me, and here we go. You know it, I'm bringing the black and white inspiration photo back with my Sharpie, and let's get to mapping out these basic shapes. This scene has this iconic kind of river runs through it thing, which I'm such a sucker for. Love it. So I know in my head, I'm thinking already that's going to be like my focal. We've got this really strong horizon line. I'm just kind of running over it again and again with my marker to get familiar with it. And then we've got this bulk of mountainous shapes in the background, and they're pretty visually heavy. And so going over these with my marker is, again, just a way to get familiar and also try to figure out how I'm going to tackle those shapes in my painting. I almost always start with the horizon line. It just gives everything a sense of stability and structure. I'm keeping in mind the whole atmospheric perspective thing. So I'm going in with just some kind of dirty blues that were already on my palette. Now I'm going right in and trying to block in some of the most distant mountain shapes, because honestly, while I love this inspiration photo, those mountain shapes feel very heavy to me. So I'm trying to sort out how I'm going to resolve that. And really, it's just about having a nice flourish at the end of the brush stroke towards the left-hand side of the watercolor paper. And then again, also a nice flourish as the brush stroke kind of exits the space on the right-hand side. If I were to make that end of the brush stroke kind of a blocky, kind of strong, hard edge shape, it would not be as visually exciting. Now, I've gone ahead and built up a nice blue on my brush to get that kind of middle section, which is the most distant in the photo. So that's super blue. So I made that choice by design. Purple, like a soft sheer purple for those main mountains on the left and right, and then that brighter blue for the most distant. And I think that was a good choice, successful choice, because I am getting that kind of sense that there's a real distant mountain range in the background. I'm going in with some clean water on my brush and just kind of blendy blend. And then now moving on to getting into this main part here where I get a good sense of where the river's running through it. Now this can be tricky if you want to do this with a little bit of a really light pencil line just to build up your confidence a little bit before you go into it with watercolor, by all means. I went into it, I painted a lot of these rivers, so I felt pretty confident. I went into it with the watercolor, and now I'm just blending out my original kind of sketch lines that I created with the brush. Just remember, a little quick watercolor tip. When you've put color on the page and it's not been there for very long, it's very easily removed or moved or lifted, so to speak. So those sketch lines were super fresh. All I had to do was add a little bit of friction and a little bit of clean water, and boom, they started to move around in blendy blend. Now I'm going into this kind of middle ground here, and always referring back to my original black and white Sharpie sketch thing, because it reminds me of what kind of shapes I want to make with my brush. Now, if you're using a dagger brush, awesome. If not though, a round brush is going to do just what you want it to do. Just press down harder when you want to make a thicker stroke, lift up when you want to make a thinner stroke. I went into the horizon line and defined with some really dark bluish green with just the edge, the curved edge of my brush. Now I'm going in with kind of a very neutral, kind of basic green to fill in some of that middle ground. Now, friends, I am not going detailed at all on this painting. I am concentrating on the basic shapes and then filling in those shapes with watercolor washes and a lot of water on my brush. There isn't the contrast of the cactus like in the previous landscape. There just isn't. This one is all about that river in the foreground and that sweeping elegance of that shape. And I'm letting that be. I'm okay with that because it's a gorgeous visual point in this painting that I'm really excited about. Now I'm going in and adding some brown, some kind of curved, repetitive marks next to one another in the middle ground, and then a really strong saturated blue on just the tip of my brush with some dabs and lift, press and lift at different angles to create a sense of that tree line. Guys, get creative here. Sorry, I said guys, I don't like that. Friends, get creative here. You know, do, of course, try to capture a sense of what you see in your inspiration photo. But if you like a little area of trees and you want to exaggerate it, make it thicker, make it more robust, make it more obvious, then by all means, do that. Take calculated steps, make a few marks, pull back, take a look, take a breath, examine, and then get back in there. Now, just like we did in the landscape with the cactus, I'm using that dark green throughout the landscape now to add some unifying detail, a little shrubbery here in the middle ground. And look at that. Even though I'm not following the atmospheric perspective colorways at this point, it's still making sense and I'm not losing my sense of depth. But with that unifying strong color in areas subtly, I'm just getting such a lovely kind of overall look that makes sense. Using the tip of my brush, I'm going to add this tree in with this dark green that I've used everywhere else. I'm going to have the longest line at the bottom of the tree, kind of scratchy, interrupted line, and it's going to ascend in size to almost just a dot at the top. So these are just little dabs, lift, quick presses and lifts, and you have a tree. Giving some definition to the mountains in the distance here with a glazing technique. Basically, I'm going over top of this dry area with a thin layer of one color, and it's going to intensify the entire area, but because the background, the base layer is still shining through, I still have that depth and definition. Now that glazed area is wet, so when I drop in a little bit of the purples, it becomes a wet and wet situation. Love that. See the beauty of watercolor? It's just constantly changing right before your eyes. Love it. Just a reminder, as a beginner with watercolor landscapes, always be looking back at your inspiration photo. Soon enough, you'll be doing some of this fun stuff from memory. But for now, I am really concentrating on the mountains that kind of notch out in the middle, the most distant mountains. And I'm adding in some really intense blue to kind of define that area. A little bit of lifting here to give some accent to the shapes that make up the mountains that are not fully in the distance. So just think about that. Whatever brushstroke you're laying down at whatever moment, or however much color you're lifting up with a dry, clean brush at any moment, is defining a shape, and it may not be defining the shape you're actually actively working on. Mind blown? Yeah. Let's get into the sky. Okay, so this is an easy one. We're going to paint in with clean water again, leaving that little 16th of an inch margin between your top of your horizon mountains and the water that you're painting, and just splash this in. It does not have to be perfect. I'm using some dirty blue, which is basically an interesting gray, and floating that into the water. This is serious wet on wet, friends, and just dab with the tip of your brush and the edge of your brush, and just let that be it. Let it be enough. Bring in a little bit of a stronger blue if you want with the tip of your brush, but blend it out. Don't spend too much time there. This is a simple sky, letting the beauty and majesty of this iconic landscape composition shine, because that's where the gold is with this particular painting. It's all about that sweeping foreground landscape. So important with this style of landscape painting. Take a breath, add a few little details. Don't get stuck in the minutia. Don't overwork it at this point. Resist the urge. And here we are. You did this. It's so good. All right, let's take a look back. Pat ourselves on the back. If you don't know what I'm talking about, check out How to Be Kind to Yourself in this art journey here. Friends, this has been such a blast. And if you're new here and you want more of this, you're going to need to make time to binge watch this collection next. Happy painting.